going to be a very entry-level kind of explanation of things. I have a nice little PowerPoint, which you can see right now. This is the title screen. And then we're going to look at 3 quick replays, and then we'll open up to coaching or practicing Terran, essentially. And if you're not Terran and you want to practice, we can go over that, and obviously I'll play as Terran. But today our PowerPoint little presentation is going to be all about why Terran, and we're going to focus on why you would select Terran. A lot of people new to the game or who've played the game for a while, like on and off, but not taking it seriously, don't know exactly what race they're going to be, and mainly because they haven't sat down and had someone explain what benefits and cons, pros and cons, each race has. Yeah, you can go to the Blizzard site and they'll give a quick little overview, but we're going to look a little more in depth of Terran specifically. So here we go. The main thing that we have to look at first off is Terran. All their units, minus their workers and ravens, are ranged units. Every other race, like Protoss, have zealots, which are melee units. Zerglings, Ultralists, melee units. So that is one kind of advantage that Terran units have, is that their Marines, their Reapers, Ghosts, everything, bam, range. Another very good pro for Terran is that we can wall off very early. That helps us stop any 6-pool or really early rushes, even Marine SCV all-ins, or even proxy 2-gate zealot pushes. So having an early game wall-off option is really good. Another thing that Terran is able to do that the other races aren't is to swap add-ons. These are the tech labs and reactors that I'm talking about, and you can swap them with different barracks, with different factories or starports, and they will still function roughly as they were. In the breakdown of the macro and micro, for Terran, we have to look out for using mules from our orbital commands, Union workers, which I'll go over a little more in depth later on, and I'll point it out in the replays. And then Terran is the only race that actually has unit queues throughout all of their buildings. And what I mean by unit queues is actually being able to queue up 5. That's a bad thing to do, but it's very different than warp gates, in which there is no chance to even queue up 1 additional unit. And it's very different from how Zergling, Lair, and Larva function, as you can't queue anything. It's all relying on how many larvae are out. The micro that you have to worry about with playing Terran is stutter step with your bio units. The Hellion placement of shooting and being able to run away to stay alive. Tank positioning. Fancy shoot, which is a lot like the stutter step, but a little different properties. Bio splits to avoid a lot of storms, Colossus shots, and really splits in general, any splash damage. Spellcasters uses the Ghosts and Ravens, and then how to micromanage drops effectively. Just to go in a little, we have a list of all the units that the Terran army is able to make out, and I listed already a few of them. First 4 are the bio units, which are produced out of the barracks, and then the next 3 are produced out of the factory, and then the last 3 are produced out of the starport. And probably what you've seen already is a lot of Marine Marauder play, which is very effective, and that's what we're talked about very briefly is, oh, we haven't gotten to that slide yet, so I'll just shut up. And we've also talked about how easy it is to wall off. Here are screenshots of just how you can wall off in different formations. We actually have 3 slides of there. The most common is in the left side of the screen of having 2 supply depots and a barracks in the middle. Another variation is also in the far right. We have the factory and the reactors actually helping block off the wall. Those are very common wall-offs. Some different variations which are a little out of style are in the middle of the screen, in which it's 2 barracks and 1 supply depot. And now we have the pure supply depot wall-offs. We do still see these variations. The far left screenshot is taken from Zelnaga Caverns, in which you can just use 2 supply depots to block off right behind the brush, so you know if something's coming and it slows it down. What we have in the top right section of the 3 supply depots is actually more and more common in a TVP, as usually we haven't been building the barracks to wall it off, and mainly because we can get that add-on and we don't have to be afraid of stalkers starting to pick off a tech lab or reactor really early on. And mainly this helps to prevent any like kind of 3-gate pressure, mainly heavy zealot pressure. And then we just have another example at the bottom of having supply depots cut off an entire entryway. And then this is our last slide of wall-offs. The one on the bottom and the right are from Tal'Darim Altar, in which you can build 4 barracks straight to wall off that main ramp and then take that expansion and be completely walled off. Or you can wall off your main by building 2 barracks right at the beginning. In the top left, I was more showing that you can actually place 2 Marauders on the ramp to block banelings from doing a baneling bust, and that can be very cost effective. Especially if you're getting ready to build what I have, a bunker up at the top. So you have a lot of DPS of the Marines hitting the bunker and the 2 Marauders stopping any baneling attempt. Of course, that's very race specific if you're only playing against Zerg. Against the other races, having the 2 Marauder wall off isn't as effective. It can block Hellion run-bys and things like that, but it's just another variation that I would like to point out. Now simply just talking about the macro. Mules, they're created out of the orbital command in which everyone to know. And why they're so important, as this gives the Terran army a fairly big advantage. Over the course of the mule's life, they'll gather an additional 270 minerals, and in which the standard minerals per minute for every race is about 800, and having the mule actually bumps that up to 1,000. So that gives us 1,000 minerals per base a minute to build Marines, SCVs, additional buildings, and what have you. Union workers, that means that we have a dedicated SCV who's going to continually build one building, go to the next. As soon as he's finished that building, starts building the next structure. A lot like a union worker, he has one job and one job only. I'm trying not to get too much heat for that statement, but like that SCV is dedicated to building a series of buildings. Usually union workers most commonly are building supply depots. Especially once you start getting to that like 38 mark, you start having that one supply constantly being produced, and as soon as the SCV is done, he goes into the next supply depot. And that usually is a multiple of how many bases you have. So if you're on one base, you have one union worker building supply depots, and if you have 2 bases, you have 2 SCVs building supply depots at the same time. And the unit queues I already touched base on. Just by looking at the bottom section with all your buildings selected, you can see exactly how many units are queued up at one time, rather than work gates for Protoss in which you actually have to see if the cooldown is gone, so you don't know if you're producing out of those buildings. And then of course there's the hatcheries and layers from the Zerg, in which all you can do is look at the larva count. The macro, which is kind of another huge element. Depending on your play style, these are areas that you can work on. Starter set, that's mainly for Marines, but can also be for Marauders, in which the technique is to shoot, but as soon as the shoot command kind of animation comes out, you automatically start moving your unit. And so it is literally stutter stepping your units. So your units will be approaching like in an A-move formation. They'll start to fire, in which as soon as they shoot their rifle, you start just regular M-move, and then you'll get the timing down, in which then you either hit hold position or stop, or even attack move again to start up another fire. The macro with Hellions, they are an extremely mobile unit, but their attack rate is extremely slow. So you have to kind of, if you want to prolong your life, as soon as they shoot their flame, a lot like the stutter step, you have to run them away since they are very fragile units. The tank positioning is actually the most frustrating for a lot of even up to intermediate and expert players, because you have to know exactly where on the map to put your tanks to cover the most maximum distance and when to move up. If you're in tank line battles, you can actually left click on your opponent's siege tanks to see the 13 range ring, and then you can slowly just creep up on that ring to siege up your tanks, and then as soon as you gain vision either via air or by orbital command scan, then you can start doing shells, and that's how you can slowly break tank positioning lines. The Banshee shoot, very common to the starter step again. It's called a shoot because usually Banshees do 24 damage per volley, and it takes just 2 shoots to kill an SCV or a worker generally. And so like that's why it's nicknamed shoot because usually they shoot twice and then just get the fuck out. Biosplits, this is extremely important more for later games in which you have to split up your army to not die to Psystorms, and another big biosplit is for Banelings. You can lose your entire army, especially if you just A-move towards a Baneling army, and I mean it will take about 3 Banelings to destroy your entire kind of Marine force. Spellcasters, this is another very late game micro setup in which you use your Ghosts or your Ravens. The 2 most important spells are probably EMP for Ghosts, and then the Point Defense Drone, or the PDD, from the Raven. The EMPs obviously are more centralized around hitting Protoss units, or to kind of act as a counter spell if you've played Magic, to completely just wipe out your opponent's spellcasters. And then drops are fairly self-explanatory, in which you load up medevacs and then drop either Marines, Marauders, and the old-fashioned Thor drops, which are very pleasant, but it's more about knowing when those timings are and where those openings are to make those drops effective. And before I move on, you can be really good at just stutter stepping or tank positioning, or a combination of those 2. You can be good at even 4 of these, or 5, or all 7. But that's all related to your play style. I don't want to say that you have to know how to stutter step, you have to know how to do this, blah, 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 blah. Unless you're like severely, high masters, then you probably should be good at all these, but it's not required that you are good at even half of these to be a very good player. What everyone likes to talk about is kind of cheese, like, oh, this is a cheesy race, or a cheesy build, or blah, blah, blah. And while Terran has been known to have extremely have a lot of options for cheese, they're probably one of the best races for cheese defense, which we'll go over. But some example of cheeses are like bunker rushes versus TVZ, Reaper rushes versus mainly TVT, Marine SCV all-in versus every single matchup, the Marauder Bunker Rush, which is more seen in TVT, but you can see it in TVP, and then Cloak Banshee versus any race, because as soon as you hit them and they don't have any form of detection, your Cloak Banshees are just going to wreak havoc. But why Terran is so just kind of awesome is this cheese defense. Because of their early wall-offs, they're able to stop a lot of 6 pooling and other crap like that. Marine and bunkers can also hold off nearly infinite amount of forces as long as they're able to be repaired by SCVs. So you can have a low Marine count compared to, say, like a 4-gate, so like a lot more stalkers, and you can hold it off. And usually the Marine and bunkers go with the wall off, of why it makes it important. And orbital command scans. And why I pointed this out, there's a lot of quote-unquote cheeses that you need scans to detect these units. Some examples are either the DTs or the Cloak Banshees, in which we talked about. Some sample build orders, that's another thing that I heard a lot from Terran players is like, okay, I picked Terran, now what do I do? What's a build? Like, how do I go from here? And so I just kind of listed out a lot of different examples, and there's way more builds than this. I'm just throwing out some sample ones. The super like kind of gold and lower, I recommend doing a 3 racks. This just kind of helps get some mechanics down and some gas management. 1 racks fast expand, very common in more and more matchups, especially since the map pool maps are getting larger. You can kind of get away with doing a lot more expansion plays rather than 1 base play, which a 3 racks would be. Cloak Banshee, even though it was categorized under cheese, it is still a relatively standard opening because it is just so strong. It can lose to a lot of early aggression, but just having that ability to contain your opponent on 1 or 2 base for so long and then have even the chance of destroying a lot of workers and even in their units, it's a sample build. The tank timing push, usually seen in TVT a whole lot, in which you do a 13 gas and then you get your factory after your second supply depot is complete, and then you push out when you have about 3 siege tanks and siege research done. The 111, this I'm strictly calling a barracks factory starport, which is very different than the Banshee tank timing push, in which has been kind of nicknamed the 111. The Banshee tank timing push is related to getting that about 3 tank and siege research, and then have about 2 Banshees along with a lot of Marines, and that's extremely tough for nearly every race to hold off. But why it became so famous is because in the TVP matchup. Another common build is Reactor Hellion into an expansion. I put the expand in quotes because normally everyone just calls it a Reactor Hellion, in which there are expand variations and there are to tech up to starport variations, or even to get stim pack really early on 1 base. Very commonly used in TVZ is the Reactor Hellion. And then the 2 racks expand. This build is more common in TVP since you more rely on getting Marauders and Concussive Shell, and then getting that really fast expansion. So you have like a mini pressure build and you're expanding behind it. I'm going to go more in depth of 3 standard builds, and then we're actually going to jump into a few replays. The most standard build, I think, is getting gas on 13. And this is how I'm going to label them. I mean, you're making a decision at the, not even 2-minute mark, and that's the build that I'm labeling. I do this for many reasons, because Terran has many options. They can stay on barracks tech, they can go to factory tech, or they can go straight up to starport tech, or some crazy combination in between. So what is really important, I think, is the first 5 minutes, in which we'll look at those replays very soon. But the 13 gas, it's very simple. Take supply depot on 10, the racks on 12, so like as soon as the supply depot is done and you get 150 minerals, start your barracks. And then the same thing with your gas, and as soon as you get 75 minerals, you start your gas, which happens usually around 13 supply. There's been a long debate of in which you should take your orbital command on 15 or 16. I always preferred 16, and very recently on Team Liquid, there was an article that described actually getting orbital command on 16 is better. It's only by a small margin. I think it was by like 9 minerals better, but you should start getting in the practice of taking orbital command on 16. And then another very good timing is 17 supply depot. This is to make sure that you don't get supply blocks, assuming you're making Marines and SCVs constantly as soon as the barracks is done. And then from there, you can do any of these transitions. You can transition into tank expand, in which you do that 3 tank siege tank push and you expand behind it. You can go up to 3 racks, which is extremely easy to do. You can go up to the Cloak Banshee push, in which we talked about. Reactor Hellion, the TVZ build, and the Banshee tank timing push, in which is oh so feared by TVP. Another very standard build, which is growing in popularity, probably popularized a lot by Marine King Prime, is the 1 Rex Fast Expand, in which you start out nearly exactly the same way. You get the 10 supply depot, the 12 racks, but we're skipping the gas. Instead of taking gas on 13, it's not even listed, because what we want is this command center up first before we do anything else. So we still get the orbital command, the OSC on 16, and the supply depot on 17, and then usually you can throw down the command center at either 19 or 20 supply, and I think the time works out to about 3 minutes and 40 seconds, but we'll look at the exact timing in the replay. And some transitions from the 1 Racks Fast Expand are to go into 3 racks, 2 gas, in which I mean by that you throw down 3 additional racks, or 2 additional racks, I'm sorry, for a total of 3 racks, and then you take your 2 gases. And then you still have the option, if you want to stay on those 3 racks, to then get tech labs on them, or you can go directly into factory. Completely up to you, but all of those decisions happen about after the 5-minute mark. 5 racks, in which you build 4 additional racks for a total of 5 naked racks before you get any gas. It's an extremely mineral dependent build, obviously, since you're taking gas so late, in which you usually have to do some early aggression with. Not sacrifice your entire Marine army, but to do some aggression with. 2 gas, and then you go straight up to Starport to get Vikings. This is a very good TVT defense, since Cloak Banshees are so prevalent. And since you got an early command center, you have 2 orbital commands that have scans to prevent the Cloak, so all you really need is that Viking. And if they don't hit you right away, or if you scouted that they're taking even later gas than you, you can even do your own variation of a delayed Banshee push. And then of course you can get 2 gas and then get 2 factories very fast to get way more, or have the ability to start outproducing tanks out of your opponent, usually in a TVT as well. And then the 17 gas. This isn't as standard as the other 2, which is the 13 gas and the Racks Fast Expand, but it's growing in popularity, I feel. I think this has the option of being able to decide, am I going to do the 1 Racks Fast Expand, or am I going to kind of delay the command center a little longer because I see an opening? But you can still relatively get a fast expansion out because your SCVs are on your minerals for so long. We'll talk about a little bit more in the replay, but 17 gas I want to explore more, and I want other people to explore more. Usually in TVT and TVP specifically, but you can also do it in TVZ as well. And which it starts out exactly the same as the 1 Racks Fast Expand, the 10 Supply Depot, 12 racks, 16 OCs, 17 Supply Depot, but instead of waiting until you have the minerals to get the next command center at like 19, 20 supply, you immediately get the gas. And you can usually make that decision based on what your scouting SCV did, or what they saw. So if you saw like a Nexus first play, this might be an actual response to get a very fast gas on 17 and just start putting on pressure, because their gateway is going to be even more delayed. And so you're putting an aggressive build versus kind of a power-up play, which relates back to the triangularity theory, which I'll go much more in detail on Thursday. But some of the 17 gas transitions is to go into that 2 racks engineering bay for a +1 push, in which you can even complement it with the Marauder Marine kind of play. And you can then still tech up to Starport after that. You can do a delayed Banshee, a lot like how the 1 Racks Fast Expand had a delayed Banshee, except the 17 gas transition is going to be faster. And the expand into tanks, or you can expand and then get the kind of 1-1-1 generalization and go from there. And then I just have some kind of rules of thumb that I like to go by when I play Terran. A lot of people struggle with knowing when to take the second gas, or even really their third or fourth. Um, Usually, the rule of thumb is take your second gas after your factory is started. This is to ensure if you want to make tanks, you're actually going to have enough gas to support tanks. If you stay on one gas, you're actually going to have a few seconds in between making tanks of just complete dead time, and that's bad. Um, and then another rule of thumb, it's more important to have more units than upgrades. And I see this fallacy a lot, and it kind of bothers me um, to a certain extent. And what I mean by it, instead of getting a really fast combat shield, you delay the combat shield to make sure you have more Marines out so that the multiplier is bigger. So I would much rather have 8 Marines without combat shield than 4 Marines with combat shield. And that's just it sounds very basic and logical. It's like, oh yeah, 8 times 45, which is the hit points, is going to be a lot more than 4 times 55, which is the combat shield. So the health of both those armies are very different, and even the DPS out of each of those armies is very different, in which the non-upgraded units are going to win. Which is another example of taking tech too early, is getting siege research even before the first siege tank is started. Because usually when you do that, you're going to have one siege tank, and then he'll be able to siege, and that's it. It's much stronger to have 3 kind of unupgraded siege tanks for some time than it is to have 1 siege tank with siege research. That's the biggest fallacy that I see whenever I watch a replay or really anything else. And that can be converted to Protoss and Zerg players as well. There are some exceptions, that's why these are just rules of thumb and not laws. The next one, you kind of need to decide if you're going to go for more of a bio play or a tech play. This is more related to if the game is going for a longer session. You don't want to have to get the +1 upgrades out of your engineering bay and your +1s out of your academy. Armory? Armory. It's called Armory in SC2, not SC1. And that's another kind of reason of resource management. The other races usually don't have that much difficulty because usually they have the evolution pit for the Zerg, and you can produce everything out of there. And the Protoss units, it affects all ground units. So Terran need to decide to either go bio or tech. Some important supply counts for when to start building supply depots are 10, 17, and 22. After you get to the 22 kind of mark, you need to start that union worker who constantly is building that supply depot one after another, and that is his job. Why 10, 17, and 22 are important: if you start the supply depot any later than that, like if you started supply on 11, for example, you're actually going to be supply blocked for an extended period of time. So these are very important numbers to know. Another kind of rule of thumb is scout after the first supply depot or after the first racks. This is kind of a personal preference. You can even scout later if that's your build and you feel very confident in it. But usually if you scout after your first supply depot, you are doing that on 4-player maps. And you're mainly trying to see exactly where your opponent is and trying to see if they're trying to do like a Nexus first build or Command Center first build, in which then I think you should be able to adapt your build to punish it. Or if they're doing a very aggressive build, to set up defenses. And then you do after the first racks on usually 2-player maps, in which currently the latter pool has Zelnaga Caverns and Arid Plateau, which are the only 2-player maps. For kind of the same reasons. I generally, no matter what, send it after the first supply depot, just because I've mapped all my builds with that first scout, and I want that early scout to be there. Next is target units before workers. There's been a long debate of what you should do. And a lot of people will sacrifice like a drop or banshees specifically to try to kill workers. And while like yeah, that's going to be good, it's actually usually more beneficial to kill the units. Mainly because number one, workers are relatively inexpensive, and they can build in 17 seconds for all the races, rather than killing a unit which are generally more expensive and take a lot longer than 17 seconds to build. The biggest example is for Protoss. If you kill a sentry, which takes about, 38 seconds and 100 gas, and that's really the important part out of the sentry, that's going to hurt the Protoss army a lot more than killing 2 workers for 100 minerals. Not only are they going to regenerate their workers a lot faster than the sentries, but gas is a very important element in all the matchups, and killing off sentries early on is going to make a follow-up push ever so stronger, in which then all he'll have to do is be able to pull off probes to counter your push, in which I'd much rather fight probes than sentries. So that's kind of why I try to target workers first, or I mean try to target units first over workers. Another example is to kill off Marines before SCVs. Even though they have the exact same cost, it's that time issue, and you're actually buying more time if you kill a Marine, which takes 25 seconds, rather than an SCV, which takes 17 seconds. And so you're buying yourself, what, 8 seconds per Marine, which and also lowers their supply of actual an army, so if your follow-up can be even stronger. And then my last one, I probably should have had this up by the take second gas after factory is started, but have your builds revolve around gas. Why I say this is a lot because of the mule, effectively. Terrans have near infinite amount of minerals. I'm going to say that with the giant asterisks, but we have a lot of minerals in which we have to dump into either building Marines or Hellions. And everything that clogs the build is our gas. If we're doing a lot of medevacs, those are relatively expensive gas units. If we're doing Ravens, extremely expensive. Ghosts, extremely expensive. All revolve around gas. So build your army and think of more of the gas units rather than the Marines and Hellions, because those are kind of like the filler units, or at least how I perceive them. But that's kind of my general take on Terran, relating back to kind of rules of thumb, some very basic sample builds, and everything else. That's just my take. Now we're going to look at a few just kind of very short replays in which all I'm really going to focus on are the 5 minutes. The first 5 minutes, in which obviously anyone can go into computer mode and practice these by yourself or whatnot. But here they are. The first one we're looking at is that getting gas on 13, so the 13 gas opening. And I think on this little example, I do tech up to starport, but that's really not the most important part of what I'm trying to demonstrate here. I'm mostly trying to demonstrate that if you want to start getting better, you need to first analyze the first 5 minutes of your build. And if you are missing an SCV or a probe or a drone for that matter, that's going to hurt you in the long run, because the first 5 minutes, any delay there is actually going to add more time on to the 10-minute mark, the 20-minute mark, the 30-minute mark. And it's the easiest to fix a mistake really early on, because you can go into practice mode and you can just get to the 5, the 6-minute mark, and then just leave the game and then watch the replays, like, did I hit all of my SCVs? Did I hit all my Marines? Did I build that supply depot on time? And everything else. And then you can really analyze just the first 5 minutes. And then once you have that build of the first 5 minutes down, then you extend it to 6 minutes, then you extend it to 7, and so on and so forth. And this is where the refinement process comes in. We had the supply depot go down on 10. We were probably supply blocked for like a second. And then we threw down the barracks immediately as we had 150 minerals. And I'm pointing out my mineral count rather than my supply count here, since that is much more important. My gas was a little late. I had 30 more minerals than 75, which is required for gas, so I probably can gain about 2 more seconds if I just started that SCV over here a little bit earlier. The next big thing of this build is I already have queued up the 16th SCV, so I know as soon as this stops functioning, when I start hitting my hotkeys, that I need to build an orbital command. As soon as this barracks is complete, immediately starts building a marine. No kind of pause there. I mean, as soon as it was done, it was done. There's actually some lag here, about 2-3 seconds. So already with 2 mistakes, I'm behind about 4 seconds with how effective or refined this build can be. I'm just building the second supply depot now, which was on 17, and as soon as I get this 100 gas, this union worker goes to work. So this one SCV built this barracks, built this supply depot, and then going to factory. So every single time that I saw an idle worker, I could just hit F1 or do whatever I needed to do and immediately say, you need to start building this. Like, it was just not only a mental kind of thing to take into consideration, but it's also a visual representation. It's like, you need to do this now. There's someone not working, and so you yell at them. I mean, when I'm driving down the road and I see all the people doing construction, and most of them are union, and they're not working, it just bothers me. So you just tell them to go to work. And that's how I feel about union workers. And then as soon as the factory's done, I think this variation, I am going to build a Hellion. You can or cannot. I'm starting to lean to not do that. But what's important is I immediately am building the starport once I have enough gas. I didn't point out that I got the second gas as soon as the factory's done, but if you're watching the production tab, it happened. And during this whole time, I've been keeping both my orbital command busy and I've been keeping my barracks busy. There was some lag time for me dropping this tech lab, in which I'm going to float the starport over and drop this. But we're already at the 5-minute and like 30s count, and there's so much analysis that I could just look. Did I start my barracks exactly when I had 150 minerals? Did I start my gas as soon as I had 75 minerals? Did I start my supply depot on time? Did I ever miss a SCV production? Am I hitting those add-ons immediately as they're ready? And we're just going to watch this starport. As soon as it was done, like the full animation wasn't even done, and I was already lifting it off, putting it in position. As soon as the add-on's done, putting it in position, queuing up everything. This is all refinement in your build. And if you are on any of the lower levels, even up to platinum and even partly some diamond people, if you screw up the first 5 minutes of your build, you've already lost the late game. And I want to stress how important the first 5 minutes are. And so that, we just went over the most standard kind of 13 gas variation, in which if you're just starting Terran, highly recommend doing this. And I'm putting after 5 minutes and 46 seconds is what I had, because that's all I care about. I don't care about how I'm marking my units, nothing else. Am I getting my building refinement down? Am I constantly producing out of all of my structures down? And then we're also looking at timing with our gases and everything else. The next build that we're just kind of looking over is the 1-rack fast expand build. I'm more leaning to opening this way in most matchups, except Zerg. I like doing reactor Hellion openings and a big push with that and expand after it. But you can still do a 1-rack fast expand out of this. And so we're going to see, I can fast forward it now because we're still getting the supply depot on 10, but we're skipping the gas, but we're getting the orbital command on 16 and the barracks on 12. And so as soon as my minerals were 150, it went down. This guy, I have him queued over here. Yeah, he's going to build the supply depot. This union worker is already to work. We are at 2 minutes and 40 seconds right now, and that union worker has already been put to work. If you do not have him working, your refinement is off. As soon as this was finished, orbital command, right up. And then we're actually going to have him, I think I screwed up a little bit, in which I could buy a few more seconds. I have him queued over here, and then I think I tell him to go back to the minerals, and then I say, wait, I'm going to have 400 minerals, so just go back and build. Oh, I even sent a different one to then build the command center. And this is when in the PowerPoint I said around 19 to 20 supply. I chose to build my command center before I got my third Marine. Oh shit, I wanted to point that out in the rules of thumb. 3 is a magic number for your Marines. Having one Marine by himself is just kind of dead fodder. He's more of a scout at that point. 2, still the only thing they're really going to do is stop like a scouting SCV. But if you have 3, then you have the ability to engage like a Reaper dead on and things like that. 3 just is the magic number. Even building a bunker and just having 3 Marines in that bunker just seems to hold things off. So 3 is a magic number with your Marines. So that should be under rules of thumb. Back to this. We're at about 3 minutes and 45 seconds. And we're just constantly making sure that Marines are being built. I have sent out scouts both of these games, but that's not what I'm trying to focus on now. Just focus on the first 5 minutes of refinement. In this variation, I think I send 2 SCVs, in which I didn't point out that rule of thumb of build buildings en masse if you're going to. But I'm sure I'll talk about that at a later date, and I did talk about it in my first episode like 2 months ago.
Armed and ready.
Wasn't producing out of that because I was tied up in minerals, so it looked like I was doing a little too much, and I got these refineries as fast as possible after these 2 barracks because I want to be able to tech up to I believe an engineering day and do like a combat shield kind of push, but I could be wrong. So I'm stopping it now. We're at 5 minutes and 5 seconds. 5 minutes 5 seconds. My 2 gases effectively just started. My 2 additional barracks are about to be done, and I could have already pointed out a few times, and I'm supply blocked right now. This is actually a big thing. This build revolves around skipping your 3rd supply depot and having this orbital command. As you can see, it's not completely finished. We have 10 more seconds. This orbital command is supposed to count as that 3rd supply depot. I screwed up this build. You may have been like, oh, but like you were only a few seconds off here. You were only a few seconds off here. I'm 10 seconds total already. I screwed up this build. I am supply blocked. This is how refinement is very important with things. Now, if I looked back and I kept doing this build, I was like, wow, I'm always 10 seconds off. Then I had the option of doing 2 things. Either building a 3rd supply depot before my command center, or getting gas early and starting like a reactor tech lab. Since obviously if I start a reactor tech lab takes 25 seconds, that buys me well over time. And since I'm not producing Marines, I'm not adding supply. And there we go. We just made this build much more refined, much more, it doesn't stop. But we can watch a little bit longer just to make sure that these Marines start as soon as this is done. Make sure this orbital command started immediately. There was some delay here. So watching this, I made mistakes. My build, especially because this was delayed, has screwed me up. Since I was probably 8 seconds behind, and this added 18. So I'm 18 seconds behind on my build right now. And that's how critical you need to analyze your first 5 minutes. Very important, because that all that shit adds up. Since that's 18 seconds, so technically that's 1 additional worker, and it adds up. Obviously, we're not looking at how to defend like 6 pools or rushes, but that's not the point of this review right now. We're just going over very standard openings and looking at kind of the refinement process of the 5-minute Terran. So again, this is going to be the 17 gas variation, in which we're going to get supply depot on 10, racks on 12, and then we're going to wait actually until our orbital command's finished and we've already started a supply depot to then get gas on 17. This variation, I think I do 3 naked racks, in which then I get 1 tech lab to do combat shield plus 1 push. It's just a variation. What really centralized the name of this build is getting the gas on 17. As the rules of thumb, we build our builds around our gas. And so as we saw, one of our builds, 13 gas, that's how we label it. 17 gas, that's how we label it. And our other one is just racks fast expand, no gas, effectively. That's how we're labeling things. How many gas and when did we get them?
SCV ready.
And if you saw it very briefly, I started an SCV, canceled it, and then started an orbital command. So I screwed something up here. I'm actually going to rewind since I didn't point out the 17. So we started this supply depot. I have well over the minerals. So I can even look at the build. Is it more beneficial to get the refinery at 16, or should I even wait till 18? It's all about when kind of the timings work. And with this specific build, I do the engineering bay, and as soon as the engineering bay finishes, I want that +1. And so ideally, I want exactly 100 gas when that engineering bay finishes. I also haven't been pointing it out, but as soon as we have the 50 energy, to drop that mule down. And of course, the orbital command, as soon as it finishes, has 50 energy, so we threw it down. And so I built 2 racks at the same time, and then I built the engineering bay immediately after, as soon as I had the minerals for it. This is going to be key to know. Constantly building Marines, constantly building SCVs out of here.
SCV ready.
I want to say I get my tech lab now. Oh, no I don't. But as soon as this engineering bay was complete, bam, +1 began. So I have 160 seconds, or 190 seconds, my mistake. What am I thinking is 160? Doesn't matter, 190 seconds before that starts. So in between, somewhere, oh, here it was. I canceled this Marine. So I got 5 Marines and started a tech lab. This is something I can improve on. I now know I need 5 Marines after I get that +1 to start that tech lab to then get the +1. And I also did have about 100 gas for that +1. Oh, but we can see I don't have 100 gas for this combat shield. So should I have gotten my second gas before or not? These are all decisions that I've had to make, and the timer is 5 minutes and 37 seconds. What I decide in the first 5 minutes dictates what I'm going to do for the next 5 minutes. So the first 10 minutes of the game shows that's kind of the macro aspect. And if you're doing an expansion build, like the 1 Rex Fast expansion, then that timer is actually longer. So that's technically a harder build to do, rather than a 13 gas, which immediately you're just going to do a 1 base kind of push and then expand afterwards or during. Yeah. I just want to emphasize how important the first 5 minutes of the game, not just for Terran, but for Protoss, for Zerg, for everyone else. First 5 minutes refinement is so important. And you know how long it takes to practice each day? Less than 5 minutes, because this is in-game timers, and it runs, I think, 1.3 faster than normal time or something. So 4 minutes a day, you can practice your first 5 minutes of a build, even if you're just starting it out, and you can just look at the refinement. Do I have the refinement down? Did I get the timings down? And ultimately what I want to happen is, I've been saying supplies, like, oh, 10 supply, 12 supply. What I want to start looking at is your mineral count in the upper right hand corner and this timing. Because knowing this is actually probably the best if you're playing solo. knowing this is going to, once you start getting more game knowledge of different matchups and everything else, this is going to say like, oh, it's now 7:30. DTs can hit me. Am I ready to get hit by DTs? Or the first Banshee with Cloak usually is about like 8 minutes and 10 seconds, I think. So I need to have a Viking, I need to have Orbital Command or turrets before that time. And mutas hit usually around the 10-minute time. That can fluctuate depending on how long the Zerg is on just hatchery tech and everything else. But that's all information on scouting. It's not the purpose of this right now. Excuse me. At later episodes, we'll be talking about those specific timings for those matchups, but don't worry about it. What I want everyone to take from this right now is not only my entry level, like, oh, look at Terran, we can shoot things, we don't have to punch things unless we're SCVs, in which then we tank forever damage. I want you to look at these 5 minutes of your build, any build whatsoever, and I just want you to refine it. Once you start getting things refined, then you can start putting it to test, in which usually I test my builds to like kind of the standard one base pushes or like all-in variations. So if you're doing like a command center first build, practice against a 6 pool. See how you do. You may be able to hold it off, you may not be. I don't know. But work on your first 5 minutes, like getting command center. Then immediately, as soon as I get 150 minerals, get your racks and go from there. And that's how I generally practice out my builds. We didn't go into my favorite builds. These are just big examples. But now that is kind of all and done with, and I hope all of you practice at least 4 minutes a day working on your 5-minute openings. I'm going to open up the chat and just kind of see what people have been saying. I keep seeing out of the corner of my eyes, like, texts keep going up, but they could all be making fun of each other, as that is a very common thing to do. So, hi, Fear Dragon. So, are there any questions specifically? Looks like one of the people are explaining a build in TVP. Does anyone have any questions about just kind of entry-level Terran or the 5-minute kind of sample builds? Anything related to that? I thought it was fairly self-explanatory, especially the 5-minute refinement. But you can ask questions about the 3 builds that I kind of showed, or really anything else. But most of this is to just give you the tools to be better. And the most important part of becoming better is in the first 5 minutes. Okay. Alright, I really like this question. Both Fear Dragon and Ice Shade both asked this at near the exact same time. Can you elaborate on why it's better to throw down the 2 racks at the same time when 3 racksing instead of 1 at a time? There's slightly different theories on this. What the big exaggeration that I like, and that's how I like to view things, is if you're just building 1 rack as soon as you have 150 minerals, build it. The build that I took the information of, like, you need to build all of them at the exact same time, is when I started to experiment with the 6 racks build, in which you build 5 additional barracks and then push with Marines. And what I found out is, especially early game in that first 5 minutes, when I start taking off more and more SCVs, like 1 at a time, that's actually making my income drop every single time I pull off an SCV, which makes the next opportunity to build that like 2nd or 3rd racks even harder, even longer. So instead of having 16 SCVs working for 30 seconds and then building all 4 or 5 at the exact same time, I'm actually going to have 16, and then it's going to drop to 15 after 150 minerals. Then it's going to drop to 14, then 13, and I'm going to have smaller amount of SCVs gathering minerals to get up to that maximum amount to then burn everything. And so if you work out the timings, then you can go through it and figure out exactly where that kind of linchpin point is. But usually, like, if I build 2 racks at the same time, I wait till I have about 250 minerals, I pull out the 2 SCVs, and by the time they traveled, I have another 50 minerals for 300 and plant them both down. So 300, 450, 600, and then 750 are kind of your numbers you base off of that. And it's all about the timing. Since your SCVs are mining more, they have a little bit longer to mine, so yeah, technically your second racks is a little slower, but your 5th one or your final destination is going to be even longer, and that's what I care about. And since like I've done a lot of batch management, that's all I care about. So like if the setup time is a little bit longer, but we can finish the project way fucking faster, I want the job just done. And as soon as all those racks are back, we send the SCVs back to the line, in which then they're gathering minerals to support all the buildings they created. That's why I like to build 2 or whatever things all at once. Did that answer your question? That's deep. That's a very good response. Somehow stim line up as well if you do it at the same time. What you're talking about is the stim concussive line. That's simple math. If you have 2 tech labs at the exact same time, you start stim and you start like concussive shell or combat shield at the exact same time, stim takes 170 seconds to build. Combat shield takes 110 seconds, and concussive shell takes 60. So if you start concussive shell and combat shield like one after another before each other, 110 plus 160 is 170, which is the exact same timing as stim. Basic math, yay! Yeah, oh, and just Makomi was adding, it depends if you want the units earlier or later. It's a very good point. Like if you're getting rushed, you probably want the second barracks right away. You don't want to wait till you have all of them. But also, if you're going to have five barracks all at once, start making Marines, that's also going to be a lot easier to micro later on, because if one barracks finishes and then 5 seconds later another barracks finishes, then 5 seconds later another barracks finishes, that's a big time gap in between in which you're hitting like all your barracks hotkey and then hitting A. And so it's actually in the long term even harder to macro. And it's a lot scarier to have 5 Marines pop out at once than 1 at a time. And even can help with your supply count. So like if you're about to be capped and you're building all 5 at once, your supply depot finishes, then you have the supply to support them. A lot of things related to building them all at once. Why it keeps going back to the 6 racks all in is because I like exaggerations. I don't like to just look at, well, what if we just inch it? I want to look at, why the fuck is it good here? Oh. You know what? I keep making hand gestures like you can see me, and I forgot that I threw up a title screen. Switch. Oh, damn it. I literally have been like, making a lot of things. But I like taking giant, like exaggerated things and seeing is there any difference, and then we can make it smaller rather than like just kind of inch it or like did that make a difference? Like it kind of did. It was like maybe 5 minerals. It's like wow, now it's 15 minerals, now it's 50, now it's 150. Like we look at those exaggerated examples and then we dumb it down. That's just how I do things. I can do that real quick. Oh, I didn't know I did that. Anyway. So I didn't know exactly how many people wanted to look at my ugly mug. Question on the second gas rule. It's a rule of thumb, for one, before I read anything else. Rule of thumb. Does that rule apply if you're doing the Banshee tank push, or do you need that second gas earlier? How I do the tank Banshee tank push is as soon as I start the factory, I get the second gas. You can get the gas a little bit earlier. What that's going to do is probably tie up some minerals to starting either a factory, or you won't be able to squeeze out something out of that factory as you're getting the starport. That's all looking at refinement. I know a lot of people like to get that second gas before factory and get not 1313 gas, because that's ridiculous, because that's -6 workers out of your already small line. I guess at that point it would lower it down to 7 workers on minerals, which is ridiculous since you're back to square one. Getting the gas earlier before the factory would probably indicate that I'm also trying to get a very fast cloak Banshee with the Banshee tank push. That's the only thing I would take from that. The cloak isn't required with that push. That's a variation of it. You can do a cloakless Banshee push. You can do even... I have seen a siegeless. You get the tank still, but you only get 2 to help versus if they have a lot of stalkers. And then you start pumping out Hellions out of it. The Hellion variation can be really nasty because sometimes Protosses overcreate Zealots, and then the Hellions just do so much burst damage that it's ridiculous. But yeah, if they take the second gas before the factory, that would indicate to me that they're trying to go Cloak Banshee with a tank timing push. There is a Raven variation. Yes. Simple question. Simple answer. The Raven variation, you usually get the Raven first because you wanted to accumulate the energy to throw down the point defense drone, which is ever so important. So a Raven pops out with 50 energy. The PDD takes 100 energy? I actually can't remember. It's been so long since I built a Raven. I know the auto turret, which has extremely high DPS, is 50 energy. PDD I know is not 75, because even with the upgrade, which no one ever gets, they can't throw it down. But you get the Raven first, then some Banshees, and you usually push with still 2 Banshees. That's kind of a magic number. PDD is 100, as iShape informs me, so my deduction was right. And then I think 125 is Seeker Missile. Okay, one other question. When do you think are the best pro players to look at for really perfect and well-timed openings for looking at replays? Makomi kind of joked and said, look at Nada. Nada is my favorite Terran player. I watch Nada a whole lot to get ideas. Actually, my StarCraft notebook, 80% are Nada builds. Looking at the early game, there's actually not too many bad Terran players. Who I would actually stay away from, and I mean this in the nicest way possible, I wouldn't watch Boxer games. Slayer's Boxer does too many creative plays that a beginning player is not going to know what the fuck to do, and it's actually going to hinder them. Boxer is an awesome, entertaining player, and I follow Nada, Boxer, Marine King Prime, and then a few of the Slayers guys. I do follow Gonzi, and I have his face, I can't think of his name, so I apologize. Oh, and OGS Top. OGS Top, I think, has incredible macro. One of the best macro. So beginning players, I would actually say watch OGS Top. and just such awesome micro game. His macro is kind of bad at times. He's gotten a lot better, but I'd watch OGS Top. Some other good players are Bomber and MMA. MMA, that's who I was thinking of. Couldn't remember his name. Bomber is extremely stylistic. If you want, like, I talked to that big list of the 7 micro things, and like you don't have to be good with all of them. Bomber is extremely stylistic with drops. Like every single matchup, he always does drops almost nonstop. Which isn't a bad thing because he's a pro player. It's just a stylistic thing. But I think just kind of cut and dry for someone learning how to do like a very good tight build. OG's Top, I think, is incredible. Nada does weird things. Anyone from StarCraft 1, they'll do weird shit. That's just kind of in their blood of how they had to play. That's what they'll do.